Despite being a relatively well-known franchise, my excitement for Watch Dogs Legion had been fairly minimal prior to its launch. It's not that I didn't enjoy the previous entries. The first Watch Dogs was one of my favourite games coming into the new generation of consoles, and although it failed to deliver graphically, I enjoyed the world of Watch Dogs and its overall plot, despite many taking issue with its main protagonist Aiden Pierce. Watch Dogs 2 had a very significant shift in tone compared to Watch Dogs 1, thanks to the criticism of the first game, and despite spending much time with the second entry into the franchise, it failed to captivate me the same way the original did due to its more light-hearted treading of its story, meshed with gameplay that, although was satisfying, did not go hand in hand with the story that was being conveyed. Watch Dogs Legion again sees Ubisoft shake up the formula of this franchise in an attempt to give the series its own identity, with a unique new system which allows you to play as anyone being its main selling point. I spent the past 2 days with Watch Dogs Legion, and now that the credits have rolled on its main campaign, I'm ready to give you my thoughts. I'm TJFL. Make sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel, and drop a comment below to let me know your thoughts on the Watch Dogs series. This is Watch Dogs Legion. Like all great Ubisoft games, Watch Dogs Legion finds us exploring a new part of the globe in this franchise, and this time it's none other than the towering city of London. But this isn't the London that we know of today, but a slightly futuristic one set after the events of Brexit, with automated cars dominating the roads and drones flying overhead to deliver parcels. It definitely feels like a realistic environment of what is not so far off in our futures. The attention to detail in Ubisoft worlds are not to be taken for granted, and you can truly feel that they've really captured the spirit of London in this game. I've played countless open world games before, but they've never been of areas so close to home. And it's crazy for me to be able to experience something that is only a few hours drive away from my home, but in a video game, and it feels so uncomfortably similar. What's also uncomfortable is how accurately this game depicts some of the darker parts of this city. From protests in Trafalgar Square to the insane amount of homeless people found along the tube stations. It's a small attention to detail that does remind you of the real world issues that we have today. But there is one massive missed opportunity within the world of London that this game fails to captivate, which is one of the central parts of the London lifestyle. That is the London tube system. Unfortunately, London's hallmark tube system is used for nothing more than a fast travel system, which is a real missed opportunity by Ubisoft, as even if they had allowed you to explore just one of the London undergrounds, I believe it would really bring that London feel to life. But one thing that every open world game has ever struggled with is making the NPCs in the world actually feel like real living people, not obstacles that you can just have fun mowing down and running over. This is something that Watch Dogs Legion actually manages to pull off and does a really fantastic job of it. If you didn't already know, Watch Dogs Legion's main selling point is that you can play as anyone by recruiting them to your team at DedSec. Prior to the game's release, I was really worried that this would be more of a gimmick, which wouldn't really have that much of an effect on my time with the story. But I was blown away by how much it affected my gameplay, in both good and bad ways. So ever since the first Watch Dogs, we've had the ability to scan every NPC's profile. In Watch Dogs 1 and 2, this gave you a very basic overview of an NPC's life, and will give you information such as their job or something happening in their life at that time. It gave a little more depth to the overall world, but it was all very surface level and had no effect on the actual game. This time around in Watch Dogs Legion, the profiler is the main system that connects all the game mechanics together. So here's an example. Let's say you see Matt here, just chilling at work. You scan his profile and you find out that he's a builder. This means that Matty can summon a cargo drone at a moment's notice, and he can also whip out a wrench during combat. So let's say that Matty would be essential on my team at DedSec. But the problem with that is that Matty has a red thumbs down on his profile, which means he doesn't like DedSec and won't willingly join my crusade. So that's fine. Let's use the Deep Profiler to see Matty's day-to-day routines. So it turns out that Matty has a rival at the workplace who's giving him some grief. So if I just visit this competitor of his and give them the old
"That's one way to take out the competition,"
Matty will be more than willing to join my cause. And that's just one example of one NPC's profile. There are thousands of different combinations and procedurally generated stories that are created for these NPCs, so that they are each unique with their own lives and abilities. During my 25 hours spent with this game, it's crazy how many times I got so lost in these individual characters' stories, and it really made me play with caution towards each character in the game. Now, if you're wondering why I played with so much caution, it's because I decided to play Watch Dogs Legion with its permadeath mode on. As the name suggests, this means that when an NPC dies, they do not come back at all. This really shook up the formula of an open world game for me, because suddenly it wasn't funny when I accidentally handbrake turned into an NPC, and I would find myself getting out of my vehicle and profiling the deceased, just to make sure I hadn't gone and whipped out a potentially promising recruit, such as a hitman or a spy, as they can be hard to come by. By Ubisoft not allowing you to have a shared inventory as such across your team, it encourages you to constantly switch up which NPC you play with, depending on the situation. I learnt this the hard way when I first started out the game. I recruited some absolute unit to the team, who was a hand-to-hand combat beast, kitted him out with some fresh clothes, and started chomping through the main storyline. After playing for around 3 hours, I found myself at a mission where I was at a construction site. Now, certain locations allow you to remain undetected if you wear a uniform that is accepted in that area, similar to the Hitman games. At the time, I did have a construction worker in my team, but decided I wanted to continue the mission with my new bay, and not even 3 minutes into the mission, it all went horribly wrong and he was killed. I learned pretty quickly after that this game definitely works in your favour when you use all the NPCs in your arsenal. So that's a lot of good things I'm saying about this new system, right? But I did say there was something bad too. And that is the voice acting for each NPC. Each NPC has its own lines and character, with some voices even procedurally modified to allow for a wider range of voices so that you shouldn't stumble across the same voice twice. And in Ubisoft's defense, they did achieve this, not in a way that feels cohesive with the NPCs themselves. You see, the voices and mannerisms are totally random to each individual NPC, and it can make for some really weird combos of characters. For example, I managed to recruit a spy onto my team, and you would think that a British spy would have the mannerisms of a James Bond and be cool and collected, but instead my spy sounded more like the guy who chats your ear off in the smoking area of a nightclub.
Another brave soul for our ranks. Welcome aboard.
I'm happy to be here. Now, let's get to it.
Fucking excellent.
This constantly left me staring at my screen puzzled, as the voices never really seemed to match up with the profile of the NPC I was playing as. I'll come back to this again when we touch on the story, but for now let's focus on the rest of the gameplay. The minute-to-minute gameplay of Watch Dogs Legion is pretty much a carbon copy of what we saw in Watch Dogs 2, but much more refined. Anybody that's followed me for a while knows I enjoy my stealth experiences, and Watch Dogs Legion provides enough flexibility to carry out stealth gameplay. From the iconic espionage tools of hacking cameras to get an overview of your situation, to sending in a spider pod to silently dispatch enemies and hack computers, the stealth experience can be fulfilled quite easily in this game. But when alarms go off, depending on which NPC you're playing as at that time, you are able to keep a handle on most situations quite easily. If you're playing as a hitman, you can quickly switch to your assault rifle and quickly make work of your attackers. Or if you're playing as a dirty bare knuckle boxer, you might whip out the lead pipe for some hand-to-hand combat. And that's the one thing that's surprisingly apparent in this new entry, is that the hand-to-hand combat is what you will use in most situations. You see that in most situations, enemies will only draw their guns on you if you also draw your guns on them. So if you keep the guns away, you can deal with most situations in a beatdown. But that doesn't mean to say that the hand-to-hand combat is good. It's fine and gets the job done, but there's only a handful of animations, and the fight mechanics are more reminiscent of GTA 4 than a Batman Arkham system. This is somewhat disappointing, as you'll spend many hours in the hand-to-hand combat, so it's odd that Ubisoft didn't put more effort into it. Thanks to the parkour system, you're able to tackle the various missions in a multitude of ways. You can normally find routes to scale buildings, and if not, you can hack a nearby drone or crane to reach vantage points. I've seen some other reviews saying that the parkour isn't great, but I found it incredibly good and much more useful than the previous 2 games' inclusion of it. This is probably due to me being more of a stealth player though. I imagine that if you like going in guns blazing, then you won't have that much need to use the parkour system. Driving in Watch Dogs Legion should feel good, considering how many games Ubisoft has released now with poor driving mechanics. But unfortunately, this isn't the case. The driving feels too arcadic and slidey to be able to traverse the narrow side alleys and turns of London. If I were a guessing man, I'd say it's more than likely that the same engine was used in Watch Dogs 2, which was fine there as it's a lot of open roads and straights, but in the city of London you need that responsiveness and tight driving mechanics to make the experience playable. Nearing the end of my playthrough, I found myself resorting to fast travelling more than driving, just due to how poor the driving experience was. So how about the story? As I mentioned previously, Watch Dogs 1 had a very gritty and dark tone, and although the main character might not have been the most interesting, the overall development of the plot was enough to satisfy most players and get them through to the final credits. Watch Dogs 2 was a complete tonal shift, which leaned heavily on comedy and being rebellious. I found it incredibly jarring to go from the cutscenes in Watch Dogs 2, where I'm everybody's friendly neighbourhood rebel, to then going into the gameplay and capping people with my 3D printed assault rifle. Watch Dogs Legion is thankfully a return to a darker and grittier version of the Watch Dogs world, where early on in the game your team at DedSec are wrongfully blamed for a series of terror attacks across London that ultimately leads to the uprising of a private military group called Albion, and a few other groups that I won't mention now due to spoilers. The story deals with some pretty heavy subjects, and I was surprised to see Ubisoft addressing them head on. This is something that we used to experience in their titles, but haven't for some time now. There are a few moments where you are given the choice of an outcome during pivotal moments of the plot, and unlike some other games, each choice feels justified in their own way. Now, the overall plot isn't much different to your typical sci-fi espionage, and the few twists Watch Dogs Legion attempts to throw at you can be called from a mile off. But I would still say that it's an enjoyable experience for most people who will get this game. However, one thing that constantly ruined this game's tone and delivery of key moments were the characters I happened to be playing at that time. This is unfortunately the repercussions of having procedurally generated characters with random voices and mannerisms thrown into the mix. There were unfortunately a rather large number of times where my immersion was just completely broken due to the particular NPC I was playing as at that time, who could be in a situation where he has to decide between the fate of a friend or of an enemy, and he'll come out with lines such as, "Nah, that's chillin' bruv, I'll save the world, innit?" And although this might not sound as big a deal as it is, trust me, it completely ruins the tone and the message that this game is trying to convey at that particular moment, and completely destroys your immersion into the game, as you end up being more puzzled or laughing at how your NPC has delivered their lines. So, with all this in mind, this leaves me feeling extremely conflicted about this game. There's definitely a lot of good to be found in this game. I have to applaud Ubisoft for doing something completely new and truly delivering an innovative core gameplay mechanic. But on the other hand, the key thing which is affecting my overall opinion is how this exact gameplay mechanic is constantly self-sabotaging this story's tone and delivery of the plot. For those of you who have followed me for a while now, you'll know that the thing I enjoy most about playing video games is that a video game can deliver an exceptional interactive narrative for the player to really throw themselves into the lives of these characters and be immersed in that world. But when the game is constantly kicking me out of the immersion by no fault of my own, it makes the overall experience extremely bumpy. With that being said, I do enjoy the moment to moment gameplay, and although it does need a few tidy ups here and there, the core gameplay experience is good. Watch Dogs Legion is its own worst enemy, and although I do look forward to another entry into the franchise, and of course the upcoming Aiden Pierce DLC, I do hope they can find a way to improve on this system so it doesn't damage the narrative so greatly. Watch Dogs Legion is a 6 out of 10. Thanks for watching guys, and make sure to subscribe for more upcoming reviews.